Hi, Kevin. How are you today?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing just fine.
Great.
We are here today to talk about a very important topic, and that topic is vitamin D. So, do you want to jump right in and let me know your thoughts on vitamin D?
Vitamin D is being touted as something that's very important for obviously bone health, and to some degree, it elongates into autoimmune health and things like that. What's important to understand is that vitamin D is really not a vitamin. It's more of a steroid. They're called cicada steroids, or cicada steroids basically are components that are like steroids. They just have a little cleavage, meaning that it's been broken. The chains are a little different. But it's important to understand, the public to understand, that the vitamin is more of a steroid rather than a vitamin. And the reason why is because it's not essential for humans to take it internally. It's generated internally by specific receptors and things like that are induced in the activity of sunlight. Many of us have heard UV rays and things like that. Vitamin D is important in a sense, and I'm going to refer to it as a vitamin because people are familiar with it as being a vitamin. It is important for calcium and mineral absorption, or the correct absorption facility of calcium, magnesium, and other basic minerals. What is important, Danielle, to understand here is it is a conditional vitamin, meaning it is not necessary for humans to take because of its
Now, are
synthesis.
you are you saying, I think you're going to answer my question. Please
Mhm.
go ahead.
Its
Go
synthesis
ahead.
is done within our own bodies. This means basically that it's a phytochemical reaction that occurs with, ultraviolet light. And once again, I'm going to keep this more or less dummied down, so to speak. So what happens is the activation of UV rays and things like that, or the exposure to UV rays activates through the receptor. It's vitamin D receptor. It basically activates it, and then it forms particular components of vitamin D. Calcitriol, as an example, is the form that's generated, in the liver and the kidneys and that type of thing. But the premise here is that basically, number one, it is a conditional vitamin. It is the most toxic vitamin if it is referred to as a vitamin. And the reason it is so toxic, or is toxic, is because of it being a steroid component, the kind of steroid, basically. It's completely different than any of the other quote unquote vitamins. The elaboration, and this bothers me, as you probably know, is this misinformation in the public about taking high amounts of vitamin D for, everything from bone health to immune health and things like that. This deeply disturbs me because there's literally this lack of information about this being, number one, toxic at high levels, and number two, the diorama that's been presented that vitamin D is a panacea for everything is so far
Hmm.
out of line that what's
Right.
happening now is we're seeing the consequence of people that are taking high amounts of vitamin D. And I'm talking about over 5,000 units, 10,000 units. I've heard people giving 40,000 units, which is
Oh, for
toxic.
sure.
And what
Yeah.
happens is now the activation, remember what's important is the receptor. Vitamin D, VDR, or the receptor,
Yeah.
is the primary responsibility of what vitamin D, once again, I'm referring it to a vitamin when it's not, the steroid. What happens is it's the VDR that is performing the benefits. It is not the vitamin D. Vitamin D is only the process in which it's been identified as as I mentioned before, is the steroid that basically is promoting or generating healthy bone, when indeed bone is not just made of calcium, it's made of phosphorus, it's made of other components. The idea of taking high amounts of vitamin D and it providing benefits for a multitude of things is just inaccurate. And it's actually toxic to people. And you'll hear more about this, I can almost guarantee it, in 3 to 5 years, of the dangers of taking high amounts of vitamin D, or even taking vitamin D alone, where something called, as an example, rickets was a medical condition that we found.
Right.
Where there is a lack of vitamin D, but that's not accurate. It's the lack of the receptor's capacity. Remember, vitamin D receptor. It's a fault in the receptor itself. And so basically, it's important to understand why these complications and why these pathologies occur and what is the causative factor. Simply by taking a high amount of this, so called a steroid, basically can be potentially harmful for us, as it stores itself as a steroid in our system, number one. And number two, it can create hepatotoxicity for the liver, because remember, the liver parlays in a lot of the metabolic conversion of the types of vitamin D into the usable form of this steroid. And that is my concern, is there is a lot of information on the public internet and through social media that vitamin D in high amounts is safe. It is not safe. And my concern is the consequence that's going to happen from people that are taking high amounts of vitamin D. And it's not that it's their fault, because that's not their arrangement to understand biochemically what happens. It is primarily laid upon the practitioners that are suggesting, or the people that are suggesting, high amounts of vitamin D. Once again, I want to restate that it is a toxic substance when taken in high amounts because of its storage rate and because it falls into a steroid category. So that's what I wanted to note to people, is to be really cautious. We are now clinically seeing effects of high amounts of vitamin D consumption with people that are now showing higher signs of stenosis, higher signs of osteophytes, which are bone spurs, and we're seeing what's happening because of this misarrangement and this misinformation about taking this fat-soluble steroid, about what occurs in the human body. And that's what I wanted to get out to people, is to just please be aware that vitamin D is not a safe compound to take in high amounts.
I think this is great information to get out to the public. And I think that there's, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like people are ascribing benefits to vitamin D for different conditions, whether it's sleep or muscle pain and relief from those kinds of things, when in fact it's something other element in the body that's causing those issues.
Correct.
But the problem here is that unlike something else like magnesium or or a B vitamin that your body just won't store, it's becoming a toxic load on your physiology, and you're not actually fixing anything. So how, what do you recommend for people who are looking for if you Google something, for instance, if you Google muscle pain or difficulty sleeping, you'll often see, you might be deficient in vitamin D. What is the real answer to that? What else could somebody be looking for that would give them the relief that they're seeking?
Okay, so once again, that's a big question. It's very rare to find vitamin D deficiency. And the numbers that people are coming up with saying you're low in vitamin D are erroneous, because they've arrived at this. It's almost like throwing darts at a dartboard with your eyes blindfolded and see where it lands. It's an erroneous number. And that's why we see the majority of people low in vitamin D when they're not low in vitamin D at all. What that is favorable. What it means is there's an activation of this VDR, this receptor site, which is healthy. So people with low numbers of quote unquote vitamin D, it's actually healthy because it shows that the VDR is principally doing what it needs to do. It's located in the nuclei of the cell, and it's allowing the correct absorption of this steroid to do what it needs to do. So instead of saying your vitamin D level is low, they should be applauding that, saying, guess what? The VDR is working effectively. So my suggestion for people that are worried about osteomalacia, osteopenia, osteoporosis is to keep your system, and we discussed this previously, keep the pH elevated, keep the pH at a higher level. We call it a baseline, or your bloodstream should be based, which is alkaline.
Okay.
The pH should be at about 7.4. I don't want to make it too complex. So by taking things like magnesium, potassium, and sodium are extremely beneficial for osteoporosis or any bone condition. The addition of boron is an example, which activates osteoblastosis. And the latter would be phosphorus. And those things are more important and more beneficial and less destructive with less toxic potential than something like the vitamin D.
Right. So in the context of bone health, I mean, I think what I hear you saying is that really people are operating in, yes, they need to protect their bone health, but they're kind of missing the mark by not maintaining the proper pH in their physiology from the food you eat. I think you've touched on in other conversations we've had that sugar causes a spike in the acidity, among a million of other cascade of events, but it creates acidity in the body. Alcohol creates acidity in the body, and all sorts of things. And so people aren't addressing those issues, and they're experiencing bone loss. And then a doctor comes along and says, "Oh, well, just take vitamin D; it'll make it all better."
Exactly.
But they're totally missing the point. Yeah.
Exactly. So what happens is they look at the bone compensatory response, meaning if there's degeneration or osteopenia or something like that, and they immediately assume it's a vitamin D deficiency when it's not. It is actually, as you pointed out, the situations that are put into the body every day, number one, and people not understanding the physiology, the correct function of what vitamin D or this kind of steroid does. And that's what's important to understand is they're not looking at the activity of the receptor, the BDR. And by skimming the stone over the water, we're not getting into the cause. Vitamin D is not the cause. It's the BDR, it's the receptor. And what happens is we have it basically hydroxylates. And what happens, and I'm trying to keep the science low, what happens is there's misinformation, or the VDR basically is fundamentally influenced by other factors. It's not allowing the steroid to be used appropriately, if that makes sense.
Oh, okay.
And then what happens is when people begin taking high amounts of this vitamin D, then what happens? The parathyroid gets thrown off. Now, the parathyroid is responsible for, the excavation of calcium from the bone, or the reaccumulation of calcium in the bone. It's not just vitamin D.
Right.
And that's what has to be understood.
It would be like simplifying that bones are made out of calcium.
And oversimplifying on why people have osteoporosis, osteopenia, osteomalacia, the whole thing. It is not repaired a substance, a steroid, that is toxic. That's the point. We do have this steroid naturally within our system, which is great. It's activated by UV rays, which is great. But the process to understand biochemically what happens, this activation of, photon exposure, which is UV rays, and how it influences the receptor, vitamin D receptor, and how things go through its whole chemical process is important to understand. Ultraviolet radiation, basically, is important because what it does is it activates the process of this steroid. And what we're
Mm.
doing is we're misunderstanding that whole process. And instead, we're loading the body with a toxic
Right.
substance.
Right. Right. You had mentioned to me something about, the half-life of vitamin D. I think it's
Very
something like
long.
2
It's long
months.
because it's
It's
a fat
very long
soluble.
for a vitamin.
Exactly.
Now,
Fat soluble. Mm-hmm.
yeah. In other conversations, we have discussed it as a hormone. Is it actually a steroid or a hormone?
It's a steroid. Even
It is a
though
steroid.
steroids can act at times similar to what hormones do, but it's known as it's basically a steroid. It's a steroid. And steroids have particular functionalities to them that is different than a vitamin. A vitamin is something that has to be obtained exogenously in the body to amplify a response. What a vitamin does is a cofactor that attaches to enzymes, as an example, and makes that enzyme work more efficiently.
That's interesting. So the definition of a vitamin is that it has to be received from outside the body. Your body
Yeah, that
doesn't,
we
it's something that
require
your
it.
body
We
doesn't
require the
need.
intake
Okay.
of it. That's correct.
Oh, okay.
Which is
That's
different than
interesting.
an amino acid, as an example. There are essential amino
Right.
acids.
Right.
There's basically 8 essential amino acids, and the rest
Right.
are non-essential. And 8 of those are required through dietary responses. And vitamin is the same thing. All a vitamin does is it basically helps a reaction occur at a more efficient rate. It helps an enzyme work more efficiently. That's what it does. The enzyme will work, but at a lower efficiency rate. And therefore, if it's low in its efficiency, we can see conditions show up with vitamin deficiencies, if that makes sense. So as
it
an
does.
example,
Well, and yeah. Please
does
go
that make
ahead.
sense? So basically,
It does. Yeah.
Any type of skin condition, that can be shown like bearberry and things like that, vitamin D deficiency. That is because the enzymes become lacking in their efficiency, their gradient. All an enzyme does is helps the metabolic process occur more efficiently. That's what an enzyme does. And in order to amplify the way that enzyme works, a vitamin is required, a substrate to attach to the receptor site to make it work more efficiently. So that's why it's inaccurate to call vitamin D a vitamin. It's more of a steroid, it's kind of steroid. And that's why it is different in all responses than any other vitamin.
So why would the U.S. government then fortify everything? Why was rickets, well, let me back up. Why was rickets prevalent to such a degree that they would start fortifying foods with vitamin D to help prevent rickets? Was it because of?
Well, several factors. Number one, because of this VDR that I mentioned. And the VDR is also accommodated by other factors. It's not vitamin D. How do you get the receptor to work more effectively as a transcription factor? You do that by making sure the body is healthier in other aspects. So VDR requires other things that are important. And it was the VDR. So by supplementing, basically, what they thought, fortifying cereals and things like that, what they were doing without knowing it is they were satisfying the VDR, which consequently meant the rickets was basically diminishing. We rarely see rickets today, and it is not due to vitamin supplementation. It's due to the activity and the efficacy and the efficiency of VDR, the receptor.
But so I know, I'm not quite understanding though why VDR would be not activated years and years ago. Like why were rickets prevalent then and then they're not now? I mean, that suggests that the vitamin D supplementation is helping in
not necessarily. What they're doing is the correlation is it's not vitamin D. It's supplementing with a lot of things. Because remember, they started supplementing with riboflavin, thiamine, niacin.
True.
It was all
that's very true. No, that's a good point.
Yeah. So
it was rickets, it was a combination of them. So even if they were to stop supplementing D, it would be fine.
There you go. So basically,
if they took D out of everything.
Exactly. Yeah. It's other things that participate in the VDR gene that encodes the hormone receptor for vitamin D. That's basically it. And it's really important to understand
Excuse
what
me.
are the influencing factors on why
Yeah.
VDR is working more efficiently now after fortification and knowledge of vitamins and things like that. So there's a whole multitude of things that assist on how VDR works efficiently.
Okay. And so I think you touched on a bit, like riboflavin would be one. What other things affect VDR beyond D? Because I feel like we got to take D out of the equation. You're going to get
Well,
it enough
there's a multitude of
yeah.
things that work effectively for VDR. There's other things as far as maintaining a correct hemostasis that affects VDR. It's not just supplementation. There's other things, but remember, it's a broad aspect. So when they started to become, when they, being people or the government, became more interested in understanding health in general, then what happens
Mm-hmm.
is VDR was more efficient at what it does. When we're talking about intestinal health, we're talking about renal health and transport, because the renal health is important for the efficacy of how VDR works as well. And then we can talk about the liver. So you can see it's a whole accumulation of things, a whole multitude of things
Mm-hmm.
that helps the fact that VDR works more efficiently.
So if someone was
It's it
adamant about, well, go
Yeah,
ahead.
let me present this to you. It's like scurvy.
Sure.
Scurvy was well known with obviously seagoers, people that were coming
Mm-hmm.
into, people that were leaving Europe, coming to the US, America,
Mm-hmm.
and scurvy due to the lack of vegetables, due to the lack of fruits, things like that. We don't see scurvy anymore. The same thing.
Right.
And they felt that scurvy was the application of vitamin C when indeed it wasn't. It was bioflavonoids. It was actually
Mm.
helping capillary fragility. So,
Mm-hmm.
and vitamin C is important in some senses to our skin. Ascorbic acid or ascorbate is important, but not in the amounts that people are taking today. And once again, it's this misinformation, and it's this dialogue that naturally assumes, listen, if A plus B equals C, then obviously this means that, DEF equals whatever. It's coming up with this idea, this formulation, without really understanding the plausibility of what they're giving people. And that's what
Mm-hmm.
concerns me about giving vitamin D in high amounts. It is toxic. It stores in the
Right.
tissue, and we are
Right.
just like a lot of other things I've spoken about in the past. Now we see the results happening. And the part, Danielle, that frustrates me is how many people do we have to see hurt and damaged because of misinformation?
Mm-hmm.
That's what
Right.
bothers
Right.
me, is this time frame that occurs where people are being hurt. And
Right.
pretty soon we say, oh, we realize that taking high amounts of this steroid is not beneficial. Well, yeah, how many people do you have to hurt in the meantime to do that? That's what bothers
When
me.
it's right, and especially when the scientific sort of pathway is clear about that. It's not like it's an
Exactly.
unknown, we're not quite sure how it works. You do know how it works, and yet you're
Exactly.
overriding that information to put a short-term band-aid on something that's actually
It
toxic.
that's that's exactly
Which,
the point.
right,
That is exactly
yeah.
the point. It
Now,
is,
it,
and
yeah,
that's why I'm giving this presentation, is because it's bothered me
yeah,
enough in my clinical practice to see it. And I've
right,
been fortunate enough to notify these people to say, listen, you have to stop that.
right,
But I want to reach more people and get to more
right,
people so they hear this. And
yeah,
I invite people, I invite other biochemists, I invite doctors to talk to me about this, because I want to hear their presentation. Because I'm one person
right.
who wants to learn just like everyone else. I want to understand
Mm-hmm.
what their premise is that I'm missing, because biochemically,
Mm.
there's not a presentation that makes sense to me about taking vitamin D, and I've yet to see it, actually.
Right, right. To see something that's definitive. Well, and then I think you also touched on, and we won't go into it today, but except for this little detail, taking high amounts of vitamin C is also not beneficial to the physiology, but it's also excreted from the physiology much quicker than vitamin D. because its half-life is less.
You're
Is that
talking about
accurate or no?
vitamin B? You're talking about, I'm sorry, vitamin B.
C, vitamin
C.
C,
That
vitamin
is
C.
correct. C is an acid sugar. It's literally
Yeah.
biochemically an acid sugar. Vitamin C will
Mm-hmm.
raise sugar levels in the blood. So for diabetics, it's more sensitive. And if diabetics are
Mm.
taking high amounts of vitamin C, that conversion is what concerns me because it is an
Mm.
acid sugar. That's biochemically what
Right.
vitamin C is, or ascorbic acid. So you're
Yeah.
correct. It's water soluble. It's excreted rapidly. It oxidizes rapidly. You know, it's neutralized very quickly. And that's why vitamin C
Yeah.
is considered helpful because it combined with other things that could be beneficial, harmful things. Vitamin C is really only necessary in our skin, in the collagen, because it
Mm-hmm.
parlays in something we call as hydroxylation. And once again, I'm going to keep it simple. And vitamin C is only one of several processes that helps in hydroxylation, which is how our collagen is developed from turbo collagen to collagen. So there are other things. There's iron, there's oxygen, there's other hydroxylation methods, not just vitamin C. So to your point, vitamin C is safer to take in high amounts than
Right.
vitamin D because it removes itself rapidly from the system and
Right.
it's water
Right.
soluble.
Yeah.
The steroid
Right.
is not. This is a steroid. This is, it's got
Yeah.
a steroid, and that's important to understand. It is different than a vitamin.
Is a steroid a version of a hormone? If you Google vitamin D, you get listings that it's a pre-hormone that then is converted into a hormone in a two-step process in the liver and in the kidneys, or
Yeah.
vice versa.
Uh-huh.
But so can a steroid also be classified as a hormone?
A steroid,
Or they're just different? Yeah.
they're different in a sense. So what a steroid does is steroids are basically components. A steroid, if you look at the body, a steroid is basically, how can I describe this without getting too,
Technical, yeah.
okay, yeah. A steroid basically is something that has biological functions that are important, like for cell membranes, signaling molecules, and I could go on and everything like that. But typical steroids would be, something like testosterone. And testosterone is a
Right,
hormone.
but
Anabolic
okay, so
steroid.
that is, yeah, so that answers my question. So it can be like that dual kind of
Exactly.
it can be labeled both ways. Okay.
Corticosteroids, as we've heard about, things that
Yeah.
are secreted by the adrenal cortex. These things anti-inflammatory. So yeah, they're functional groups that basically translate. Well, steroids, as I mentioned before, they translate into sex hormones. So
Right.
yes, they do translate into that. But that's
Okay.
why
Okay.
it is important to understand why vitamin D, I'm going to reflect back on this, is so detrimental in even small amounts, Danielle. And I'm talking about
Absolutely.
200
Well, you're
IUs.
dealing
I'm
with a
talking about small amounts.
yeah.
And we have people out there. I was watching a sequence on someone saying, hey, 60,000 is okay to take. And I'm going, something is wrong here.
Yeah.
Either,
Yeah.
and I'm not the smartest guy in the world. And I'm thinking, you know what? This advice is damaging. You're hurting people. And the gentleman that was suggesting it may just not be educated enough in biochemistry. So I'm going to excuse that he's doing it deliberately. He just doesn't understand biochemically what vitamin D is.
Right, right. And he's extrapolating some study or something that suggests that vitamin D is good to take, and he's exponentially like, if a little is good, then a lot must be great.
Yeah,
I
so
mean,
what I
how else can you
encourage,
excuse? Yeah.
I encourage other practitioners to educate themselves. It doesn't take that long. Look at the conversion rate of what vitamin D does. And I'm not talking about it, you don't have to go into that much biochemistry, but understand that this is something that is fat soluble. It stores itself in the tissue. The consequence that I'm looking at is organ saturation, and basically hypercalcification within the bone, the periosteum, which can lead to
Mm-hmm.
osteophytes. And that's, or stenosis in the foraminal canal. And that's what I'm concerned about.
Yeah. Well, and I think that it's important for people to do their research beyond the most superficial internet search because you're going to get
Mm-hmm.
a lot of media sources that
Mm-hmm.
echo this idea that you should be taking higher amounts of vitamin D. And
That is
you could, on a
correct.
surface level, you could say, oh, well, this health line or this publication says it's fine. But
That
if you
is
dig
correct.
deeper, then you get to, then you have to almost go through the marketing layer and get to that.
Our job as Meehan Formulations, this company, is to protect people, is to make people sure that people are getting things that, number one, advocating safety first, and then efficacy
Right.
second. That is above all else what is important.
Absolutely.
And
Right.
myself, I am designed to educate people, just like I like to know. It's what biochemically makes sense. And that's why we display the
Right.
information that we do.
Right. And really, Meehan formulations, every formula that you have developed and have patents on are biochemically correct. And
Exactly.
not all supplement companies can say that.
Exactly.
Not
And
many
when
can say that, frankly.
and
Yeah.
I have designed formulations that we don't market because I didn't think they were efficient enough. When I looked at it, I
Mm.
said, this isn't going to work, or this is not, and we didn't,
And it didn't
probably
go to
more
market.
than
Right.
double of what we have right now. It has to
Yeah.
be efficient. It has to biochemically resonate.
Mm.
And that's what's
Mm-hmm.
important. And that's why I
Mm-hmm.
feel, Danielle, it is vital to get information out to people that is correct. And
Mm-hmm.
people can check what I'm saying. People can do the homework
Yeah. Oh,
themselves.
for
They can
sure.
look it up.
Absolutely.
I'm
Yeah.
sure there's a lot of, I don't know if you want to,
We can
Google
put
whatever
some,
you want to Google and check
right.
the
Well,
biochemical
and we'll
format that I'm suggesting.
Yep, and we'll put in the underneath, the podcast in our notes. We'll put some sources for the biochemical mapping of vitamin D, and you can see where the science
Exactly.
is reflecting exactly what you're saying.
These,
That
it,
it's,
and to extrapolate on this, when we talk about vitamin D, people think well about calcium absorption and things like that. I want to note that calcium supplementation is not beneficial. Calcium supplementation and calcium any salt form generally it's found in a salt form. Calcium
mm-hmm,
carbonate is an example form is not that healthy. It is not beneficial
mm-hmm,
to take calcium in that fashion because what you're doing is overloading the system with unusable calcium. And what happens is this ends into the circulatory system. And then that calcium can accumulate and deposit on the arterial wall. And this is what
mm.
concerns me.
I know that one of the benefits of vitamin D is to bind to pull calcium in I think it's the small intestine, correct? It functions there. But if you're also taking calcium, then are you just like creating a
A
horrible
larger,
storm in your physiology?
if you're taking it with a steroid,
Vitamin D and
vitamin D,
calcium.
you are
Yeah,
creating a higher incident. You're creating a cascade event.
right.
You're creating
Where
an
you have
escalation of the
calcium
problem.
circulating. Yep,
Yeah,
yep,
you
yeah.
are creating a problem.
So you had
Yeah.
mentioned before a better solution for bone health is phosphorus and boron, but then
And
also
electrolytes.
maintaining and electrolytes. Yep, that was my next one, was
And
maintaining that electrolyte pool.
and
Yeah,
calcium is an electrolyte, but I'm not referring to calcium as much as I am magnesium, potassium, and sodium.
because those are more
Now there are
beneficial in the
people that
stability.
will listen to this and say, "No way, this isn't." But I encourage those doubters to look at
Hmm.
what I'm talking about. Go to the
Yeah,
biochemistry.
yeah,
Understand what vitamin D is. If you doubt what I'm saying, please, I want to hear about it because I'm an open venue. You know me, I'm happy to learn.
yeah.
If you can show me another functionality that is not being arranged biochemically that I'm unfamiliar with, please present it to me because I'm open to
Right,
that. I
right,
want to see
right.
how individuals that are prescribing vitamin D in high amounts support it without it being dangerous. I want to hear about it.
No, mhm. I would love to hear from someone. I would hope
Of
someone that
course.
does this would actually reach out and we could have a dialogue.
And we're
Because
open to
if we
it.
need, exactly, right?
Yeah, we're open to it.
So we'll
I'm
see.
open
We'll
to it.
see what happens. We'll see if we get
Yeah.
any takers.
I want to hear. I want to talk. That's what this is, an open dialogue. This is how we learn. This is how we, but the most important thing is to protect people, safety first. And that has been the paramount topic here for me, or the paramount feeling is to make sure that people are protected.